and then I'll know that we can go ahead and get started. All right, and as folks are joining, let me know in the chat, where are you joining us from? Where are you joining us from? All right, I'm going to take 1 second to check to see if we are live over on YouTube. But again, a reminder, if you are here, let me know in the chat. Say hi, and maybe let me know where you are joining from. All right, I'm just checking in to make sure that we are live over on our channel, and then I'll go ahead and get started talking about the GMAT Focus Edition. Super exciting stuff. Okay, it looks like we are good. So we'll go ahead and get going on the GMAT Focus Edition. All right, so if you have been following the world of the GMAT, you know that there is a new version coming, the GMAT Focus Edition coming later this year. Now, this announcement was kind of a surprise to most folks. May have been announced a little sooner than was intended, but it's here. The announcement is here. It has been officially announced. There was a little bit of buzz for about a week before it officially came out. News is still coming out. So this is what we know as of today and what you need to know to prep based on this information. So what are we going to talk about today? Well, first, I'll introduce myself. Hello, my name is Erika. I'm the Senior Product Manager here at Magoosh. I have a 770 GMAT score, more than 1 million views on YouTube. You may have seen some of my videos, and I have years of experience teaching and writing test prep. I do a lot of different tests. The GMAT is one of my favorites. We'll see if it's still one of my favorites after this new change, but I think it will be. We'll see. And I live in Portland, Oregon with my husband and my 2 cats. You can see them right there. All right. And again, if you're still joining, introduce yourself in the chat. Say hi, hello, and let me know where you're joining from. Okay, goals for today. We are going to talk about the key differences between the current version of the GMAT and the Focus Edition of the GMAT. So what's going on currently? What's going to be going on once they roll out this new version? And how does that impact your prep in particular? We're going to review the timeline for the GMAT Focus Edition rollout. So should you be caring about this right now, or does it not impact your timeline? When's there going to be prep? We're going to talk about that. And then we're going to talk about what you should do about these upcoming changes. So how do they impact you based on your specific timeline? Okay, let's go ahead and jump on in. Now, first thing I want to share before we talk is that we have this code, YouTube10, exclusive to this live stream, that you can use for 10% off of Magoosh GMAT. So 10% off of our Magoosh GMAT plans. Great deal. You can use it on our website. Go check it out, especially if you like this content and you're prepping for the GMAT, either edition. We'll talk a little bit more about that later. All right, let's talk key differences. All right, so this is really what we're here for. What are the differences between the current version of the GMAT and then this new version? And are those differences good? Are they bad? Do they help you with your prep, or do they hurt you? Let's find out. We'll start by talking about the structure of the test. We're going to talk about the structure, we're going to talk about the content, we're going to talk about the scoring. Those are the 3 types of differences we're going to talk about. So let's talk about the old structure of the GMAT, or the current structure. All right, so we have the quant section, or quantitative reasoning. This is math, right? And it's 31 questions in 62 minutes, or about 2 minutes per question. We got the verbal section. It's about 36, not about, it is exactly 36 questions in 65 minutes. So similar, little different, little bit less time per question. We've got IR, or integrated reasoning. That's 12 questions in 30 minutes. And we've got AWA, or the essay, and that's going to be 1 question in 30 minutes. So we got 4 sections on this test. And if you add up all of that time, it's over 3 hours. All right. It's 3 hours, 7 minutes without any of the breaks, right? So this is a long, long exam. And then on top of that, we can't change our answers. All right. So every section, as we get a question, we have to answer it. There's no skipping, right? There's no skipping and coming back. There's no putting in a guess and then changing it later. You cannot change any of your answers on the existing GMAT. This is one of the hardest things about the test from working with students, right? With other exams, there's strategies of, I got to move on because this question's taking too long and I can always come back. On the current version of the GMAT, you got to move on, but you can't come back. So you're sacrificing questions. You're saying, I'm gonna get this wrong. And that's like a serious mental barrier for a lot of folks with this exam. Let's talk about the new version and how that might change some of that logic. So the new structure of the GMAT in the Focus Edition is we still got quant. We've still got a quantitative reasoning section. However, it's only 21 questions in 45 minutes. All right. So this is a much shorter section, both in terms of questions and in terms of minutes. And you'll also notice that the timing is slightly different, right? With the old quant section, we had 2 minutes per question. Here we have slightly more than 2 minutes per question. Is it enough to make a difference? I'm not sure, but a little bit more time per question. All right, let's talk verbal. On the verbal section, we have 23 questions in 45 minutes. So same section length between the two, couple of extra questions in that verbal section. Here I want to note that, again, we have slightly similar timing. I'll note here actually that while quant got a little bit more time per question, here verbal gets a little bit less time per question, which is especially interesting when we're going to go into some of the content changes that have happened between the current version and the Focus Edition. So verbal, again, a much shorter section, much shorter. All right. Now, this is where things get really weird because we don't have IR anymore. We have a new section called Data Insights. Now, this section's maybe not that new, and we'll talk about the content in it, but it's got a new name. It's called Data Insights, and Data Insights is 20 questions in 45 minutes. So you'll notice here that we got 3 sections, each 45 minutes long, with different numbers of questions in the section. So you'll see that Data Insights, we've got the most time per question, then quant, and then verbal. And that's it. Those are the only 3 sections in the new Focus Edition. So no AWA, the 4-section structure is gone. We've got 3 sections, 45 minutes a pop, for a grand total of 2 hours and 15 minutes. Much shorter. All right. And then here's an interesting piece. This one I'm still figuring out my take on. Used to be you could not change any answers. With the new version, when you finish a section, provided you have extra time at the end of the section, you will be taken to a review screen. And on that review screen, you can look at any of your answers and you can have bookmarked them in advance as you go through the section. And you may change up to 3 answers within that section. So this is very interesting, right? So because we're only changing up to 3, the test retains its ability to be question adaptive, right? It's going to be changing the difficulty of questions as you go through the section, right? Difficulty a little harder, a little easier, a little the same, depending on how you're performing, right? But now you can change some of those answers at the end, but only 3 per section. Interesting. All right, what's that going to mean? Well, let's talk about it. So what are the takeaways from these changes in the structure? First takeaway, it is much shorter. All right. If you have taken standardized tests before, you'll know most of them are long. And that's part of it, right? That's part of the pain of this exam, is that it takes a really long time and you're getting really tired at the end. That's one of the strategies that I talk about a lot with the current edition of the GMAT is doing your section order such that you are getting certain sections when you're less tired, right? That's classic. So I typically recommend starting with Quant because it's really unforgiving of making mistakes, then going into verbal and then doing your AWA and your IR, right? Now, with this new version of the exam, you'll still have the option to do section ordering. You can still choose, are we going to do Quant first or verbal first or data insights first? That still exists. But because the exam's a lot shorter, you're not going to have that same like massive fatigue that you'll have at the end of the current version, right? There's a difference between 2:15 and 3 hours 7, right? So it's much shorter. You're going to have less of that struggle with fatigue and with maybe a little bit of time management. All right, so Focus Edition, much, much shorter. There's going to be more decision making around changing answers. So again, like I mentioned, this I'm still working out my take on because you can only change 3 answers. So that means that you're going to be able to make some changes, but not maybe as many as you would make. So it's not like we're returning to our normal standardized testing strategy of, hey, I'm just gonna, guess and then I'll come back, or I'll just not put an answer and come back. One, you have to put an answer when you come back. You cannot just not put an answer and then come back. You have to put in an answer. All right. And you can only change 3 of them. So that means that really it's kind of like a hybrid strategy. It's kind of similar to what we've been doing where we're going, okay, I'm gonna do my best, but I'm gonna move on, with the knowledge that I can come back to exactly 3 questions or fewer than 3 questions, no more. So it's actually maybe even more decision making than before, right? We're going, okay, I gotta move on, and maybe I'm gonna have to sacrifice this question, but depending on how I do on the later questions, maybe I won't have to sacrifice it. It's really kind of complex. So I'm still figuring out exactly what my advice is around this, but it is more decision making and it's slightly more complex decision making. I'm really excited for more official prep to come out. And by more, I mean any official prep to come out, because then all of us will get to try it and we'll get to see how this feels. And I'm going to be able to firm up my advice. But all of this to say, the ability to change 3 answers per section is going to kind of change our approach to how we're taking this test. All right. Another takeaway to these changes in structure, RIP, IR, and AWA. These sections are gone, which is kind of interesting because some of them were a little bit newer, right? But they are gone. And in their place, hello, data insights. Now, what exactly is data insights? We're going to talk about that as we go into our content and our changes. But takeaways here, this is a much shorter exam, which should be a lot more accessible for a lot of folks, right? It should be a lot easier, a lot less painful. That's great. We get some more decision making, which is actually useful. That's part of the promise of the GMAT, right? Is that it actually tests your capability to make business decisions, to think critically. And this ability to change up to 3 answers per section is really going to test that. Pretty cool. And we're getting rid of IR and AWA, kind of a preview of our scoring section. These were the sections that did not contribute to your overall score. So this kind of makes sense. And then data insights, as we get into content, we'll discover it's really testing critical reasoning, problem solving capabilities. So it makes sense that we're bringing this into the mix and bringing this into the total score. Okay, preview of what's coming up. Let's talk about key differences in content. All right, so let's talk about the old content, or again, the current content. This version of the exam still exists and will continue to exist through early next year. Okay, old content. The quant section, or quantitative reasoning, had 2 problem types: problem solving and data sufficiency. All right, hopefully that's familiar, those words. So problem solving is your classic 5-answer, pick one, multiple choice. Data sufficiency is the one where you have the 2 statements and you're going, hey, can I get one and only one answer to this question using those statements? Verbal. Verbal has 3 question types: reading comprehension, critical reasoning, and sentence correction. So reading comprehension, longer passages where we're answering questions about that passage. Critical reasoning, we've got a shorter stimulus passage where it's an argument and we're analyzing. that argument. And then sentence correction, where we are looking at a sentence that may or may not be flawed, and then picking the least flawed version of that sentence based on grammar, based on logic, etc. All right, so those are our primary two sections. IR had a lot of question types in it, specifically 4 question types. And I would have abbreviated these, but I was worried that I would not remember what they stood for. Because again, we don't think about IR very much with the current version. So it's got 4 question types. It's got multi-source reasoning. It's got table analysis, graphics interpretation, and 2-part analysis. And these basically are what they sound like. Multi-source reasoning, we've got a variety of sources. So little passages, little tables, little graphs. Table analysis, we've got a table. Graphics interpretation, we have a graphic. You get it, right? So IR has these 4 question types. All right. Also noting, this was the only section that was not section adaptive before. So you just got all 12 of those questions. And then AWA is an essay. All right, a written essay. So unlike the rest of the test, which is multiple choice, AWA is an essay, right? You write it in, it's free response. Okay, let's talk about the Focus Edition. What is the content like? Quant is just problem solving now. And you might be going, whoa, that's crazy. Data sufficiency is like the classic GMAT question type. It is the most inventive part of the GMAT. Hold your horses. We'll come back to data sufficiency. But data sufficiency is gone from Quant, all right? And there's also an interesting thing about the content of Quant. So Quant used to be arithmetic, or I guess still is. The current version still exists. Arithmetic, algebra, geometry, and other things, right? Geometry was a not insignificant portion of the material. Geometry is gone. At least it appears that way. I'll note that this has not been officially announced. This is based on screenshots from the official guide when it was still up on Amazon. It's no longer on Amazon, all right? But based on the official guide that was up in Amazon, we could see, hey, there was not geometry in this section. This could change. This is a rumor at this point, but it's looking like geometry as a content type is no longer going to be tested as part of the math on the GMAT. This is interesting. We'll come back to this. All right, so Quant is back to problem solving, just 5-answer multiple choice. Verbal has also had a question type eliminated. So verbal is reading comprehension and critical reasoning, end of list. Sentence correction is gone. Gone. So that piece of grammar, logic, all right? No longer here. All right, we still have the passage analysis, right? From reading comprehension, from critical reasoning, a lot more logic based, but the piece of, oh, does this verb match this noun? And do we have a parallelism? That's gone. Interesting. I'll talk more about this in a second. Data insights. You might be going, totally new section must be totally new content, right? Wrong. Data insights is the 4 question types from integrated reasoning and data sufficiency. All right. So question types we've already seen, question types we are familiar with, but repackaged into a new, more analytical section. So Quant has returned to kind of like basic math roots, and data insights has taken the more analytical piece of the math or Quant section, data sufficiency, and combined it with the analytical questions from integrated reasoning packaged together into the new data insights section, which will be question adaptive. So with IR, that used to not be adaptive. Data insights now is going to be adaptive. Interesting. And that's it. All right, so no essay anywhere in here. So what are our takeaways on the differences in content here? We got a bunch of them. All right, first takeaway, essay writing no longer being tested. All right. Oh, and I'm seeing some questions in the chat. Just going to pop in here. When is it being released? Oh, I'm really tempted by this Focus Edition. We're going to talk about that after we get through the differences. We're going to talk about the timeline, and we'll talk about, hey, what should you do based on that timeline? So don't worry, we're coming to it. All right, so takeaways on the content. Essay writing is no longer being tested. This is honestly, in my opinion, great. Essay writing was the section that I emphasized the least to my students. I said, hey, part of the function of essay writing is to go, hey, can you do this in a test environment? Which is partially like, hey, are you meeting baselines? Not are you excelling, but can you meet the minimum of what folks are looking for here? And did you plagiarize your admissions essays, right? So they can compare between admissions essays and AWA to go, did the same person in theory write this? And that was essentially it, right? This was not the most important section. It did not contribute to your overall score. And you study for it very differently than the rest of the test because it's free response, right? It's writing, it's not multiple choice. It's a different world. So I think it's great that we've removed this section. It is no longer being tested, and that really shaves off some of the stuff that you're going to study, but also the length of the exam. Very cool. Sentence correction is no longer being tested. This is also very interesting. Sentence correction in particular is a question type where you had to learn a lot of rules. And if you're taking the current edition, you still have to learn a lot of rules. And these rules are, I think, especially challenging for non-native English speakers. Some of the rules, there's 3 different things you need to learn and you got it. But then we have other things like idioms, like diction, that is really, really challenging to learn. And you almost have to just kind of go by feel in a lot of cases. You have to use your ear, which is not a good strategy, right? So I think getting rid of sentence correction is going to be great for especially non-native English speakers who are taking this exam. Love that. But it's also going to be nice for everybody, right? Because I don't know anybody who really knows a ton of grammar rules, right? Who really learned a ton of that in school. So I find that a lot of folks studying for sentence correction is learning those rules. And then once they have the rules, they can do the logic on top of it that it's actually supposed to test. But you have to learn those rules first, which really takes a lot of studying time. So eliminating this question type means, hey, we're not wasting your time with the rules, right? We're not wasting your time going back and brushing up on grammar that doesn't really matter. You can communicate adequately without those grammar rules, and you can succeed in business without those grammar rules, right? You can send a logical email without perfect parallelism. So getting rid of this section, I think, is great. And now we get to focus on reading comprehension, on critical reasoning, which is a lot more logic based. Now I'll note that might be harder depending on you, right? So if you're someone who really excelled at sentence correction, maybe you like those rules and struggle a little bit more with like the logic of critical reasoning or getting through the passages of reading comprehension, maybe that takes you a long time. The verbal section might be more difficult for you now. So it really just depends on who you are and what questions you are more or less successful with. The sentence correction, gone. Geometry, gone. All right. And this is really interesting because I think of this as a similar move to sentence correction. So sentence correction, you have to know a lot of rules and then apply logic on top of them. Geometry, you have to know a lot of rules and then apply logic on top of them. All right. By getting rid of geometry, we go, there's just a ton of equations you don't have to memorize anymore, right? There's still stuff you have to know how to do for sure. You got to know tricks, you got to know some equations, but far fewer. All right. So that means that we're emphasizing the logical piece and less the rote memorization piece. Again, it gives you an opportunity to test more and test more effectively. So I personally like sentence correction and geometry, but I think for this test and for most people taking this test, I think this is a better move. So these content types fully gone. Now, data sufficiency is gone from Quant, but it's not actually gone, right? It has just been moved to data insights with all of the other IR questions. So while it sounds like, wow, brand new section, data insights, it's not, it's just IR with data sufficiency. So same stuff we've already seen, just repackaged. And the takeaway from all of this is that there is no new content on the Focus Edition. It is the same stuff pared down and reformulated. So if you're going, what's the new stuff I need to study? Well, you need to study the new structure. You need to study how to take this new test. But if you already have the content, you're good. There's nothing new being introduced on this exam, content-wise. All right. So Don't emphasize essay writing. Don't emphasize sentence correction. Don't emphasize geometry, and maybe a little bit less emphasis on data sufficiency because there's going to be fewer of those questions. All right, so that's the content. We'll come back to this a little bit more when we talk about what should you do, but we're going to move on and talk about the changes in the scoring. And I'll preface this by saying this is all, again, in that rumored territory. All right. This is all stuff that came from those screenshots from the OG that have been pulled down off of Amazon. This is not stuff that has been officially announced. So it could yet change. I doubt it. But again, this is not an official announcement at this point. So let's talk about the existing scoring for the current version. Quant is scored from 6 to 51. All right. And this is not a raw score. There is some magic that happens where they take the number of questions you got right, the difficulty of those questions, and then it translates into the score from 6 to 51. All right. Then we have verbal. Same deal, 6 to 51, right? So they have the same scoring between those two sections. I'll note that the actual scores don't compare super well. There are different percentiles associated with different numbers, different section scores, but they have the same scale. All right. There's IR, which was scored from 1 to 8, and there's AWA, which is scored from 0 to 6. All right. Now, the total score on the GMAT is 200 to 800, and that score is composed of your quant and your verbal scores. So IR scored separately, AWA scored separately, which, as I was talking about earlier, means that particularly we emphasize quant and verbal in our studies because those contribute to your total score. IR and AWA less so. We're mostly hoping to just do okay on those sections, well enough to not raise any flags. And if you're taking the current version, that advice stands. But if you're taking the Focus Edition, things change a little bit. All right, new scoring. Quant is going to be scored from 60 to 90. All right, and again, this has not been officially announced for sure. It's just from those screen grabs from the official guide. So it could change, but I doubt it. All right, Quant scored from 60 to 90. Verbal also scored from 60 to 90. All right, so same scale, just like currently, but we don't know, again, how those scales compare. The percentiles could be very different across those two sections. So an 80 might be super high on verbal, but maybe only the 75th percentile on quant. We don't know that yet, but the same section scoring. And then data insights is also scored from 60 to 90. So now we're seeing, okay, data insights is different than IR. And the IR was its own thing. Data insights is now being put on the same level as quant and verbal. They have the same scoring across each exam. And that is reflected in the total score. Now, very strange. The total score is now 205 to 805. Not really sure what that's about. Maybe just to distinguish from the old score. I don't know. Maybe there's more logic to it. It goes in 10-point increments. So you might have a 795 or a 685. All right. And that score is composed of quant, verbal, and data insights. All right. So it's composed of all three of those sections. Now, we don't know for sure yet whether they're contributing equally to the score. I would guess yes, that just like quant and verbal currently contribute equally to that total score, I would guess that all three of these new sections are contributing equally to that total score. That's not confirmed yet. All right. So check back, but that would be my guess based on the fact that they all have the same section scoring. Okay, so what does that mean for us? What are the takeaways here? Takeaway number 1, every section matters now. All right, so again, advice for the current version is not fully ignore IR and AWA, but don't give them nearly as much attention as quant and verbal, because again, they don't contribute to that total score. Now, all of the sections go toward that total score, probably equally. So every section matters now. You have to care about those 4 IR question types. They matter at this point. So Every section matters now. You have to care about each one. But still unknown how scores, section scores, total scores correlate with percentile. So we don't know that a 55 isn't a real score. A 70 on one section correlates to a 70 on the other section, correlates to a 70 on the other section. We don't know that yet. We also don't know how they roll up into that total score. All right, so there's still a lot of unknowns about scoring here, but the big takeaway here is that you have to care about each section. Once we have practice tests, we can start paying attention to percentiles and things like that. But for now, just know you have to care about every type of question on this exam. Okay. So those are the key differences. Now, I'll also share that there are some other little things that have changed. So for instance, the current version, you can purchase an enhanced score report, which basically gives you more information about how you performed on your test, how you performed over time, how long were you spending per question, how did you perform on questions of different difficulty, how did you perform on questions of different content types, but it costs extra money, right? On the Focus Edition, what they're instead doing is saying, okay, there's no enhanced score report. For every person that takes the test, we will give you better reporting. So you will get more analysis coming out of your test. That's really cool, in my opinion. I love the enhanced score report. I think it provides a lot of value if you are retaking, which I highly recommend because it tells you a lot about yourself. I know I learned a lot about myself when I looked at my enhanced score report. I learned that I was spending more time on the questions I got wrong than on the questions I got right. Yikes. All right. So that's a takeaway, right? So this is valuable. Does it impact how you're going to study? No, other than that you might get more value out of a retake. But that is a change. And there are likely some other little things here. And again, there are some things that are still coming out, being revealed. But big takeaways, those are the changes to worry about. Now let's talk about the timeline. When do we have to start worrying about those changes? Let's talk it through. So the first date or time frame that you need to be concerned about is that in late Q2 2023, official Focus Edition prep will be available. And I really want to emphasize this. There is currently no prep for the Focus Edition. If you see somebody advertising, hey, we've got a Focus Edition practice test, right now, they can't have that. That does not make sense because there has not been a test released at this point. So if there is something like that, it is made up, right? It's a best guess. All right, there are test prep companies like us at Magoosh where we're getting our ducks in a row, right? But we are waiting for this official prep to be released so we can go, okay, how actually does this work? What does this look like? So that then we can bring that into our product. So late Q2 2023, they haven't released a date yet. All right, this is not official at this point. I'll say that on Amazon and on various other retailers, there are a variety of different dates in a variety of different countries. If I had to guess at this point which one seems the most realistic, I would guess June 6th. That's the date that seems the most believable. And it fits with this timeline of late Q2 2023. Do I know that for sure? No. But I would not expect any sort of official prep for several more months. Does that mean you can't prep for the Focus Edition? No, but it means be skeptical if you see any practice tests before that, because they're not based on anything. All right, so official prep is coming out in late Q2 2023. There is currently none out there. Focus Edition registration opens in Q3 2023. All right, so that means in the second half of the year, but the first half of the second half of the year. So we're looking at July, August, September. Somewhere in that zone, we're going to be able to register for the Focus Edition, to sign up. So you cannot sign up for it at this point. Once we get in that zone, at some point, they're going to start making dates available and you can sign up to take the test. That does not mean you can take the test yet, because the test is not actually going to start until Q4 2023. So that means at the earliest, we're looking at October of this year. So we're looking at October, November, or December. Somewhere in there, the first dates for the Focus Edition will start up. So you'd be able to take it online or in a testing center, but not until the end of this year. All right, this maybe is going to impact course of action for some folks. So testing does not start until the end of this year. And then let's talk current version. So I saw a question about this in here. Hey, when's it going to be released? And if you can you select either one for a while? All right. We are going to continue to offer the current version through early 2024. All right. Now, what does early 2024 mean? I don't know. They have not released a date. It could be January, right? Could wind it down really early. It could be a little bit later, but there is going to be a brief overlap of a few months where you can choose, do I want to take the Focus Edition or do I want to take the current version? So if you are currently studying for the GMAT, you can take the current version for another 9 months, right? Maybe longer, maybe a little shorter, but for a while. Now, after that point in early 2024, the Focus Edition is the new GMAT. That is all that is available. So depending on where you are in your study, this is going to impact you differently. All right, so that's the timeline. Now, I don't have any takeaways here because the takeaways are our next section, which is what should you do, right? How should you respond to this information about the timeline and about the changes between each version? All right. If you are applying in 2023, if you are applying this year, just take the current version. All right, the Focus Edition might sound exciting, but it does not necessarily fit your timeline, right? It's not going to be available until the very end of this year. And you're not even going to be able to prep for it for another couple of months, right? No official practice test for another couple of months. So it does not really make sense if you are applying in 2023 to wait for the Focus Edition. Just take the current version. It works. And that's just what it is. All right. So you can't take the Focus Edition for months. You can't prep for the Focus Edition for months. And your current version scores will still be valid for 5 years. This is, I think, really important to emphasize. GMAT scores are valid for 5 years. So if you're going, I don't want to take the old version because there's a new version coming out and schools are going to look at them differently, your scores will still be valid for 5 years. So if you've already taken the test and now you're nervous about this announcement, don't be. As long as you are applying in the next 5 years, you are good. You're fine. Schools will still take your scores. So if you are applying in the near future or you want to take the test in the near future, right? Maybe now is the time for you to study, right? Even if you're applying later, but you're studying now, just take the current version. Don't wait on the Focus. It's going to be a while. All right. Now, if you're applying in 2024, right? Maybe you're just kind of dipping your toes in the water of prep, but you can wait. It's up to you, right? If you want to study now, all right, and you want to take the test sometime in this calendar year or very early next year, you can take the current edition. And that means you can prep now, right? Because the materials exist now. The practice tests exist now. But if you can wait, all right, which if you're applying in 2024, maybe you can, then maybe you can wait for the Focus Edition. So it's up to you. And really, I would say it just depends on when you want to take the exam. If you want to take it soon, take the current version. Don't worry about Focus Edition. If you are going to wait, you can take Focus Edition. All right. So let's talk. Let's say, okay, maybe you're taking the test in 2024. You can wait. And you're going, I want to take the Focus Edition. All right. I like it. The sound of it's really nice. I don't like sentence correction. I don't like geometry. I don't like the fatigue of taking a 3-hour test. I don't want to write an essay. I'm not interested. I want to be able to change 3 of my answers. I want the Focus Edition. But you also want to study right now. Well, the first thing I would say is you're not 100% going to be able to study right now because, again, the official materials aren't here. But there are some things that you can do to get your feet wet before you get really into the study when materials are released. So if you want to study now for the Focus Edition, all right, you can study the same content, right? Because as we know, it is the same materials, just with less stuff. There's no new stuff being introduced. So if you were going for sure, I'm taking Focus Edition, you can skip your sentence correction study. Don't learn those grammar rules. It's not important. You can skip geometry. Don't learn those shape rules. Not important. You can skip prepping for your essay. All right. You're not going to write one. And then the other thing that I didn't put in these slides, but I'm going to say here, emphasize more IR, emphasize more integrated reasoning in those question types, because those will be more emphasized in data insights. Those will go into your total score. And then I will also say maybe emphasize a little bit less data sufficiency. Emphasize it on the same level, perhaps, as some of those IR question types. It's going to be a little bit less impactful than it was when it was part of Quant, most likely. Again, we don't know exactly how this data insight section is broken down. Maybe it's half data sufficiency. We just don't know at this point. But very likely it's going to be a little bit less important to that overall score than it is currently. You're still going to do it, but maybe just a little bit less. So study the same content. You can use existing materials, the materials in Magoosh. You can use those. Official materials, you can use those, but you're going to just emphasize different areas differently. And then practice tests, I often really recommend. I say take a practice test every 2 to 4 weeks, right? We love practice tests. They're so great for practicing for test day. But the current version of the practice test, while it's great for exercising your test-taking skills, it's not going to be realistic to what you actually take as the Focus Edition. So be sure if you are studying now, maybe focus on content, but you're going to need to come back in a couple of months when that official prep comes out, those 4 official practice tests come out, and you need to take those because those are really going to help you practice your test-taking skills. Practice, okay, this is the new format. Okay, this is how I time myself. This is how I set myself up so that I can use those 3 questions where I can change my answer to my benefit, that actually doesn't hurt me in the way that I'm thinking about these questions. So you will need to come back in a couple of months to take official practice tests, but also maybe to take official practice tests from the companies that are going to release them. Again, at Magoosh, we are thinking about this now. We are waiting until there is official practice tests that we can use as a baseline, and then we will release our own prep based on that, again, coming shortly after that official prep comes out. All right, so you'll need to come back to do practice tests later. All right, and then check back regularly for changes and newly released information. Like I said, some of the stuff that I said here is based off of screen grabs off of an Amazon listing that no longer exists, all right? So this is not officially announced. Do I think it's going to change? No, but it could, all right? And there's going to be more information that comes out, whether that's more specificity about the dates or things like how are those sections distributed? How many data sufficiency questions are going to be in data insights, right? Those things are still coming out. So if you are going to take the Focus Edition, this is not it. This is the information as of April 11th. There's going to be more information. So go look, get on the newsletter. You can go to the GMAT website, type your email in, and they'll send you emails with more information about the Focus Edition. I highly recommend that because, again, information is still coming out. So check back regularly for information. All right. So that's it. That's all I wanted to say here. So big takeaways. The content is changing, but there's no new stuff. We're just getting rid of some stuff. The structure is changing. We have emphasis on all of the new sections, but some stuff is gone. The scoring is changing. Still figuring that one out, but data insights is now more important. I guess it didn't exist before, but all of the question types are equally important. I guess each of the sections is equally important. The timeline is progressing, but it's progressing somewhat slowly. So for you, what you do is going to depend on your study timeline and your application timeline. But if you really want to study for the Focus Edition now, you can just come back for practice tests. And that is what I have to say about the GMAT Focus Edition. All right, now I'm going to take some questions because we have a little bit more time, so feel free to throw questions in the chat, but I'll shout out again that we have this exclusive code YouTube10 for 10% off Magoosh GMAT. So if you head over to our website, you can sign up for the GMAT, sign up for GMAT Prep using this code for 10% off of any of our GMAT offerings. And I'll note that right now we have prep specifically for the current version of the exam. We are working on our prep for the Focus Edition, just like everybody else. All right. So that will be released within a few months. All right. But again, if you are studying for the current version, you're set. If you're going for Magoosh GMAT, if you're studying for the Focus Edition, you can start now on the content, and then the practice test, the format will come. More of that strategy will come. All right. All right. I'm going to take a look at some questions. I'm so glad that this was useful to you, MAR. Feel free to let me know if you have any questions in the chat. But I'm going to pop back a little bit earlier to see what other questions we previously had. All right. Oh, this is you again, MAR. So you're saying, hey, Miguel, I'm currently better at verbal than I am at Quant, using the 3-month Quant study guide in Magoosh. Love that. Very tempted to do Focus. All right. So if you're currently better at verbal than Quant, I mean, it depends. How is your data sufficiency and how is your IR? Because on the one hand, the Quant section proper is going to be a lower part of the total score, right? Currently, Quant is like 50% of your total score. With a Focus, it's going to be a third of the total score. But you have data insights, which is a lot like Quant, right? It's analytical. There's some math in table analysis. There's definitely math in data sufficiency, right? So depending on your specific skill set, it could be more of that sort of Quant stuff that you struggle with in this Focus version. So it really depends. I mean, in an ideal world, the thing that I would recommend to anyone is take one of each practice test and then compare your percentile scores. And then that should inform what test you take. I would say don't compare raw score because they're on different scales, but compare your percentile scores. And that would inform which test you end up taking. But again, we're months out from being able to do that. So again, right now, I'd say decision-making based on your time. Okay, let's see what else. And Miguel, totally agree. Yeah, no, geometry is awesome if true. That's feedback that I know a lot of test prep providers have been sharing with GMAT for some time. Manal says, okay, when is the Focus Edition of the GMAT set to be released? So like I mentioned, you know, it's going to start being available to take in Q4. So earliest October of this year, you can start signing up. Again, earliest might be July. Well, I think I can't remember exactly what the dates they said. I think they said late Q3. So that might be like September, might be like October. I'm not totally sure. But again, you won't be able to take it until the very end of this year. And then again, for a little bit of time, you can select which one, traditional or Focus, through the beginning of next year. But after a certain point, it's going to be Focus only. So if you've already started studying for a classic and you're vibing with it, or you know, maybe your timeline insists that you take your test a little bit sooner, I would say go with the classic version. All right, Tanvir says, I surely will attend the Focus Edition. Totally get it, right? There is an appeal to the shorter exam. There's a reason that they did these things, right? It's going to help test the more important stuff and test it in a more concise frame of time and with a more concise amount of study, again, because it's focused more on that critical reasoning piece, right? That problem solving piece and less on the memorization piece. So I think this is a great move for really getting the most out of students' time, both studying and taking the exam. So if your timeline will allow, I think it's great. But again, make sure you're thinking about your timeline here. All right. Yeah, because again, this might mean no Focus for the first round in 2024. So I think schools have kind of an interesting thing ahead of them where they've got a few years coming up, especially this coming year where they have exams of both types. So I'm really interested to start seeing where percentiles fall for these various scores. I gotta say, I think part of the reason this new scoring is that 205, that 805 in 10-point increments, is so schools can tell what type of test you've taken at a glance, right? So if you have a 680, you took the classic version, all right? And you have to be compared on the classic version scale. Whereas if you have a 685, you took the new version and you have to be compared on the new version scale. So they won't necessarily compare as raw scores to each other because it's different content and it's likely going to be a different scale. So that's going to make it really easy for schools to tell, hey, what score means what. Let's see, maybe universities will look at these last classic tests with less of an eye on the sections being retired anyway. I mean, I think part of the reason that we've gone for this move is that schools were already not really looking with as much of an eye to those sections, right? So like AWA, IR, all are already less important because they're not part of that total score. And I think with this move, we're going, yes, no, you shouldn't be paying attention to AWA. It's not that important. But you should be paying attention to the questions from IR. And that's why those are being promoted to data insights. So maybe actually there will be more attention to IR. I don't know. We'll see. I can't say. it'll be up to specific admissions committees. But, kind of a tricky thing about, the question types being retired is that, the schools aren't really going to see that. They're not going to be looking at the enhanced score reporting. So if you're taking the classic version, you still have to care about geometry because it contributes to your quant score, which contributes to your total score. You still have to care about sentence correction because it contributes to your verbal score, which contributes to your total score. So it's kind of a strange thing where you have to care about the question types that contribute to that total score. Still probably don't care as much about AWA. Maybe care more about IR. I don't know. It's an interesting one where schools are probably still figuring out how they're going to react as well. But that's my take, just based off of this initial information. All right, let's see. Tanvir says, I am better at quant, but weak at verbal. So we got the opposite situation of Miguel here. How do I do better? Yeah, great question. My recommendation would be, it's super going to depend, like content-wise and strategy-wise, on your particular weaknesses. The first thing that I would say is practice more verbal. Spend 70% of your study time on verbal and 30% on quant. The other thing that I would say really quickly is, are you sure you're better at quant and weaker at verbal? Because like I mentioned, those section scores do really not totally correlate with each other. I know for me, and for a lot of other folks, I had a higher section score, like the number was higher for quant, but my percentile was higher for verbal. So the thing that I would say is, even if your verbal number is lower than your quant number, just check percentiles, all right? That's going to be important. Check percentiles and see which percentile is higher. Now, if you're still going, okay, my verbal percentile is lower, then I would say emphasize verbal more in your study, but check that first because that's a common misconception that I see. So I'd say practice verbal more. And then the thing that I would do is start to kind of get granular with it. Which questions are you missing more of? So are you missing more than half of, say, sentence correction, but less than half of reading comprehension and critical reasoning? That would mean that you are performing at a higher difficulty on reading comprehension, critical reasoning, and your sentence correction performance is pulling you down. So there I would go, you would want to be focusing more on sentence correction. So take a look at your different question types and go, okay, where are my weaknesses? Then you can look within that question type to go, what types of questions am I missing? Am I missing within sentence correction, particularly stuff that focuses on modifiers? All right, study modifiers. All right, if you're looking within critical reasoning, maybe you're finding I am specifically missing inference questions. Okay, so we're going to emphasize the inference questions and not so much the other question types. So you can look and go, what am I really struggling with? Maybe you're going, well, I just don't finish the section. Okay, so then we need to practice our strategy around when am I going to give up on questions? When am I going to move on sooner? Maybe I need to work on my strategy of I need to get through my passages faster because I'm spending too much time reading every single word of the passage when really I should be getting the gist of the passage. Or maybe I'm skipping the passage, jumping straight to the questions, and that's actually wasting more time. So it's really going to depend on you. But the big piece of advice that I would say is dedicate first, check, make sure you're actually weaker at verbal based on percentile. Dedicate more of your time to the section you're weaker on, and then do an analysis of your personal performance to make sure that you're focusing your attention in the right areas. Hopefully that's helpful. I also really recommend maybe using a prep product that's going to help narrow in on those weaknesses. If you're self-studying, it can be hard to be like, well, what type of question is this? How do I get materials specifically on you know, assumption questions or on paradox questions or on parallelism. How do I do that? That can be hard when you're self-studying. A product like Magoosh, where we break down the content into specific lessons, into specific question types, we allow you to practice specifically what you're struggling with, can make it easier to do that more personalized prep that can really help you get the most out of your time. So those are my tips. Hopefully that's helpful, Tanvir. Okay, I think that's it in terms of questions. If you have more questions that come up, you can throw those in the comments on this video. And if you are watching after the fact, if you did not watch it live, you're coming in later. Again, if it is not April 11th, there may be more information now. So go check the GMAT website, mba.com, to see what is the new information. And again, you can use this code YouTube10 for 10% off Magoosh GMAT as of today, April 11th. We have prep for the current version, which can help you for the focus version, but work on our focus edition prep is on its way. All right. Thank you so much for being here. Hopefully this was helpful, and let us know in the comments if you have more questions. See you later.